so you're an expert on all things the brain and also the mind.
Trying to be.
Which I think is kind of fascinating, or you're in a constant studying process of it. I'm curious, the first question I have is, what do you think is the biggest factor, since you studied both the brain and the mind, what is the biggest factor that holds us back from thinking in terms of abundance and thinking in terms of positivity? Why do we stay stuck on negative thinking, negative thoughts, and limited mindset so much?
Yeah, that's a big question. So the simple answer is that the stories we've been told about what's going on in our skull, they're just wrong.
Interesting.
Okay, so the first thing is there's no wires. We're not hardwired. There are no gears. So let's go backwards. Way back when, like ancient Egypt, they thought it was just like flan or something. The soul was in the heart. And I believe, I can see that. I've opened chest before for cardiac surgery, and it's fierce. And what they would do is stick a straw up the nose and slurp out the brain, just get rid of it. So for a while, I could understand the complete misunderstanding. Then when sort of like, speakeasies and industrial revolution, all the pictures about the brain, you see them as gears. But modern time, we're starting to think about it as wired. I'm wired for this, I'm wired for that. You're not wired for anything. It's an ecosystem filled with throbbing 100 billion microscopic jellyfish, sparking electricity at each other, trying to approach each other, shaving down, pruning, branching, arborizing. So when I use those words like arborization, pruning, those are neuroscience words in rigorous neuroscience journals. But it hasn't sort of made it to pop culture. So I think part of what keeps us stuck is that we think, oh, I'm wired this way, or I have to rewire, and it's too on-off rather than flows, right? It's not freeway from A to B, it's the way you see a school of birds flow.
That's good right
over
there.
each other, Aurora Borealis. That's how thoughts and that's how feelings float through the ether of our minds. When you start to understand it like that, then you know every day something new is possible. Is it easy? No, but it's possible.
Wow.
So that's the real way to think of your brain, mind, and behavior that is completely plastic, in the sense that you're never the same person just from a moment ago since we've met.
That's a good introduction to this. I'm curious because you do surgeries on a weekly basis where you open the skull, mostly the top of the skull.
Well, all different areas. It's like ice fishing, so we make
Holes out.
wherever we need to get, we make the hole
Gotcha.
underneath it so we can get there.
So it may not be a full top of the skull.
No, that's in
off.
Hannibal Lecter's movie.
So you're taking little
Yeah.
little holes.
The slickest brain surgeons, meaning who can do it the best, make the smallest hole to get right where you need to, the smallest incision, and do the most,
The least amount of damage, I guess, to the whole skull. Have you ever had to take off the top, the whole top?
No, but in trauma, after boxing, sports, car accidents, sometimes we take off two big pancake sizes on the left and right.
Really?
So when the brain is throbbing,
They
if
release.
you take the lid off.
Really?
But you don't take the whole thing off because you got a giant vein coming down the middle. So you can't do the mohawk part. You take two strips.
Sides.
Yeah. So if you look at, when I traveled through South America, you look at the trephinations, the holes in the skulls, they're always on the side. You can't make holes in the middle and still live.
Really?
Giant veins splitting the two hemispheres.
Oh, so that's just in the movies.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's Silence of the Lambs.
Right, exactly.
But that's a good question, though. That it's a targeted approach.
Interesting.
You want the
Okay.
patient to feel it the least.
Right,
And
of
wake up
course.
the best.
Right, of course. What's been one of the biggest realizations from studying neuroscience, but also studying the brain and actually opening up pieces of the skull, looking in there, surgically doing things to optimize it? What was one of a big aha moment for you studying both areas where you're like, wow, there's something that I didn't think was possible that is actually possible for human beings to do?
Yeah.
Is there anything?
Yeah, a really good question. It ties back to your first question about what holds us back. So the thing that shocked me was that we could actually remove parts of the brain and people would go home a week later. I'm not saying there isn't some subtle neuropsychiatric issue, but for example, I had a guy come in, he's a framer, and they have the pneumatic, it's not hammer and nails as many people conceive it to be, but boom, boom, boom.
Yes.
And a lot of times when a recoils back, they'll pop a nail through their orbit or nose
Oh.
into their frontal lobe,
This happened.
and they drive in. It happens
With
a
a
lot.
nail in their
Yeah.
brain?
Right, so that's the first
Come
thing I was
on.
like, wait, no, totally. I got pictures on my phone that we're not gonna show anybody, but you can have a penetrating injury to certain parts
Of the brain.
of the brain and you drive in.
Holy cow.
So that's the first thing I realized was, so there isn't a region in the brain for creativity, there isn't a region in the brain for this. So the first thing I had to realize was, no, this thing is working as an environment, as an ocean filled with like a kelp forest and jellyfish. So if you drop something into the ocean, you're not gonna disrupt it. There's no spot for something. And that ties back to what I want people to walk away with is that you have to think of your thoughts and feelings and the working of your flesh inside your skull as a garden, as an ecosystem. Just because you have one weed or one spike doesn't mean the harmony is disrupted. So,
Wow.
for example, one frontal lobe we can surgically remove if needed after trauma or tumor, and patients function. They drive, they talk on the phone. Again, you don't want this. One occipital lobe doesn't leave you blind. It's people think occipital lobe blindness. No, if I take out a tumor from the right occipital lobe, I just can't trust my left rear view mirror when I drive. It's a field cut. Your world goes from this to this. So when I first started seeing that, because I assumed you hit any part of the brain, you're dust.
Because people will say like the left side of the brain is for this and the right side of the brain is for this, and
No.
I use more of the right side of my brain, and that's why I'm creative or whatever it is, or I'm more analytical
No.
because I use this side of the brain, or my fear-based side of the brain is heightened. So
No.
so you're
No.
saying if one
No.
part of the brain is under attack, tumor, trauma,
Sort of, yeah.
I don't know, a nail, whatever it is, something happens to that part of the brain. It may not hold you back from your creativity or your critical thinking, potentially.
No, because the rest of your brain can compensate. Now, let me give you, that's not true for the entire brain, so let me just go backwards a little bit. But those were the aha moments I had. I mean, I've seen bowels, I've taken care of patients, AIDS was, went crazy in the 80s, I've seen a lot. The first time I saw somebody do brain surgery, I was like, is that possible? Or, like, can you even remove the skull? And they're like, yeah. And then there were, can you remove that tissue to get to the tumor? They're like, yeah. You just have to understand how the whole thing works globally in harmony. Now, the way I think of the brain is like a mushroom. And so you've got the canopy. And all the magic and the thoughts spark from the top, the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And then they send things down to the stalk, which comes, deep to your mouth and comes out of the bottom of your skull and then turns to your spinal cord.
Wow.
So if when I want to move my left hand, my right brain says, move your left hand, it sends down signals that come under my armpit, that come under this nerve, and
That's
that's what
crazy.
happens, right? Now,
So what is that? What
those
is it?
lower parts, there is something, you hit that, you lose something.
Something down here.
The reptilian brain, the spinal cord,
Down
every
this-
millimeter does something, because it's a lot of, think of it as cables, even though it's not wires, but those
Wow.
become tracks, Tracts. There are a lot of tracks that are communicating the things that the canopy thought of. And in that area, if there's a nail injury, you do get a certain deficit. But in your thinking, your feeling, your emotions, your love, your fear, it's not a fear spot or a love spot. It's sort of, again, the aurora borealis and the worlds of a school of birds just
Wow.
flowing in different
Wow.
energy, right?
Or
So that's
fish, a school
yeah,
of fish or
a school
something.
of fish,
Yeah.
exactly.
That's
So
fascinating.
that's I
That's
want people to
incredible.
walk away with, okay, so
I just
these
learned a
people
whole
are-
bunch of stuff.
The fear I have is real, but it's not fixed. It's
Yeah.
not wired. It's not permanent.
Right.
Through effort, through exposure therapy, through whatever it is, whatever your process is, that school of fish can flow in a different way. To me, that's infinitely powerful. That we are new every day. That also gives us the responsibility to hold on to our positive attributes.
Hell yeah.
That we can spiral away every day, and we can spiral downward, and we can spiral upward any day.
Wow. And so have you studied brains where someone came in at one point and then maybe a year or 5 years later you saw them again and you were able to look inside their brain?
So this dude's name is Rahul
What did you see different
Jandail,
with the brain?
brain
Can
surgeon
we
for a long time.
enhance our brain by the way we think and our behaviors and our actions and the way we love ourselves and treat ourselves internally and emotionally or can we hurt our brain by doing the opposite?
That's a profound
And the guy
question.
interviewing him is
Again,
Lewis
let me start
Howes.
with a very sort of dramatic example to set the point to the
Yes.
larger takeaway. On occasion, for epilepsy that shuts down kids, we have to actually take away half of the brain. It's called a hemispherectomy.
You have to take out half
We
the brain.
remove. Everybody can Google it. It's not like it's something we invented today. It's been going on for decades. Yet, because a lot of the people in this space are not actual brain surgeons, we're not getting a lot of those stories from there. But there's a tremendous story there that when there's a medical need and the parents ask for it and it helps the child, we can actually make a big incision and take away a frontal lobe, a parietal lobe, and occipital lobe that's sparking seizures. And when they wake up, that left side doesn't work. 3 years later, when you see them,
No,
they're at, yeah. This is not even sci-fi.
they can move, they can function fully again.
So the remaining hemisphere can reorganize.
Huh.
The linebacker can also be the defensive end, can
Sure.
also be sometimes even on offense. There are different roles those neurons can
Really?
play. Yeah. So and how
That's
do we know
crazy.
that?
Because you removed half the brain and it's still functioning.
And we took a picture 3 years later, and that half the brain was still gone.
Still gone.
Yeah, it didn't sprout back. It's not like a liver where we cut half of it off and the mom
Really?
grows some back, you take a chunk and then you put it in the kid. So that part is still missing,
Gone.
yet that function has returned.
That's crazy.
So that's what I mean about different players on the team can cover for each other. So I want people to know that's true plasticity, and it's not rewiring, it's not regrowing, it's actually whatever you have is repurposed. And how do they do that?
Repurposed.
Well, through the electrical flows of the mind. There's
Wow.
that's
So not the electrical flows of the brain,
right.
the electrical flows of the mind.
So it's like, we'll pause it. So it's like all of them are working together like a soccer team. Because he describes this as being an athletic mind and playing. It's more like soccer than anything. It could be like basketball too, but a team sport. And there's a whole bunch of neurons and things that are firing. But what I was gonna say. But this is super fascinating. This is called Brain Surgeon Reveals How to Heal Trauma and Destroy Negative Thoughts. Dr. Rahul Jandail. I've been watching him, and this guy is intelligent. So, I think what he's trying to say is, because it's kind of hard to understand too, but like, some people might think that your brain just fires off in electrodes, boom, it does, but it's all working together at the same time. I mean, it has to be opened up too as well. Because could be blocks in there from spirit manipulation, That's most people's problems. Is there's a block in your understanding. There's a block in the center of the brain, so you only use one side, or your right side or your left side brain. That's why they say left and right side brain, because there was a block, right? And so the male and female aspect brain, the designers, okay? I mean, this is very complicated. This is very intricate. This is very detailed. Okay, that's how you know an awareness and an intelligence have been here, been around, because this is it's all connected. Anyway, get off this.
So what is people are like? Okay, now he's gone. Now he's selling crystals in Malibu. No. Stay with me.
Stay with us now.
When you you played, right, and we talked about that briefly. I didn't know that about.
This guy's
it. Fascinating. I think there are a lot of parallels with surgeons and athletes.
Mm-hmm.
I think surgeons want to be athletes, but became surgeons.
Yes.
When you walk up to a stadium, there's every single, so I was at SoFi.
That's incredible. No, I've been there. It's unbelievable.
I don't think people understand. It's the world's largest pit. You come in near the top because of the LAX flight path, and you come in and you look down.
It's like deep.
I know.
It's amazing.
It's good to be in my hometown.
Yeah.
When you walk up and you see the pieces, 70,000 fans. Think of those as neurons. We have 100 million. Those little magical sparks from the jellyfish that I described, because they look like
it's 100 billion neurons.
So you can talk. People are talking and moving. That's how people conceive or conceptualize the brain. But what happens when they roar together? That's what I mean about the electricity of the mind.
There's an energy.
Right. There's an energy.
You feel it.
It's an epiphenomenon. Okay. Now let's build an engine. The parts are there. You fire it up, and there's a hum, right? That's more than just the engine and the piston. A symphony, you've got the musicians. I'm less familiar with this, but they create something bigger.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I mean about the mind. That it's not a forward, backward electricity zinging around on wires. It's that thing that happens when you have 100 billion throbbing, growing, branching neurons. And it's electricity based. You can put a sticker on and light a small light bulb.
That's inside the lobes.
So that's
inside. That's what's connecting. It's like built.
This is decades old. This isn't like.
Yes.
So what I want people to say is like
structure inside. There we go.
When we remove the right hemisphere and the patient comes back 3 years later, kids, and they can function again. No new wire sprouted. Nothing was spliced. What remained created a new roar, created a new hum, recovered the function. So it's not always easy for people to understand, but that's the truth. And that's our current understanding of how the brain leads to the mind.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can the brain function without the mind?
If you get knocked out in a ring, you're not thinking.
Right.
And if we put electrodes, there's dampened electricity, but that stalk, remember I mentioned the mushroom? That can still keep you breathing and protect your airway and keep your heart still going. So the reptilian areas of the brain, the ones that we share with many animals, will function without a mind, without that. If you equate mind with consciousness, thought, love, emotion.
Wow.
So it's like the babushka dolls where you have.
So it can function, but it's not.
Advanced.
It's baseline function.
Yeah, it's
not,
basic.
Breathing.
High level cognitive.
But they work it together.
The mind is really what's
the higher capacity learning and understanding. The brain neurons firing off. Boom, 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 boom.
Right.
The mind can think down the heart rate that the reptilian brain keeps going if you get knocked out. So they're integrated, and so you put it nicely. The mind can keep things going, but if you have brain death, then there's no mind. There's no electricity. Brain death. So unfortunately,
what's that mean?
Meaning sometimes the body's alive, but the brain has died.
How's that happen?
Well, we'll get into some. I think it's important for people to understand. So, car accidents, brain swelling, those 100 billion neurons, they burst from smashing into each other. We put a catheter in the thigh, and we squirt dye. We see there's no blood going into the skull. It's a dark vault. So your brain has
swelling. If it's so much swelling, the blood can't flow. There's so much inflammation that it's hard for blood to flow.
So instead of a heart attack, you've had a complete brain attack.
Can you recover?
And for a day, no.
You can't recover from this.
Not even miracles. When it's 100.00 out, there's never anything left. But for a day, since the heart nerves have their own pulse,
Yes, they're pumping.
when we can put machines and things and to keep people going for a day or so, that's where the world of organ transplantation comes in.
Right.
So a lot of guys or a lot of people who ride motorcycles, they have that kind of injury, and their bodily organs are healthy, and they often are, you know, the ones that provide transplants for other people.
The brain is
brain
not
death,
functioning.
body is alive. So
Really?
in that setting, there's no mind, there's no electricity coming out. So when you're asking
Got it.
about mind and brain, and so that's a fascinating area for people to know those examples, to understand themselves better, right? And it comes back to that we are electrical currents.
There we go.
Wires, we're not switches, we're not
Gears.
spots, we're not gears.
Electrical currents.
Yeah, they're flows. That's what
Spirit.
is that. So like you go to a lake
With intelligence.
and you drop you jump in there, whatever, right?
Yeah.
There's a wave that moves through the lake,
Uh-huh.
but the water molecules didn't ride with it.
Right.
Jay always says a river. you know?
That's the hum, the symphony,
Uh-huh.
the roar, the electrical global waves that are pulsating through our brains. And when people say they're in the zone, or they're in a flow state, or they're in a meditative state, that global energy flow, those waves, they're different. They can be measured and categorized.
Really?
Right? Yeah.
So what does that mean when someone's in a flow state in terms of the mind-brain connection? What is happening?
Yeah.
Are these 100 billion jellyfish like in symphony and they're
Yeah.
humming at a high level?
Well,
They're
look,
working in concert.
Let me jump in right there. Actually, that's perfect.
Yeah, it is
Actually,
perfect.
You would think that if somebody's about to hit a game-winning shot, their best performance is when they're at a high level, meaning wild, frenetic. Actually, no,
Whether it's super calm.
somewhere in between.
In between, yep.
So not asleep,
Right.
but not, hey, I'm on my third espresso and just taking in stuff in the
But
morning.
Focused.
Focused, but relaxed. And there is a measured
Yep.
state for that. And it usually has to do with sort of medium brain waves. That's something I'm writing about right now.
Delta waves.
And whether you meditate or you're
It's a
into
name
that,
for the
you
wave.
2-minute drill in football, or you're a ballerina and you have that perfect, dance routine coming up or maneuver, you are actually disengaging some of the things that would get in the way of you releasing.
Your conscious mind.
You're not thinking the performance, you're getting out of the way.
You're being.
You're getting out of the way.
And that has a different measurable electrical flow state.
That was good.
And it's not revved up.
It's not hyperactive. It's
Somewhere in between.
above calm, but calm.
It's not fifth gear, it's not idle.
Yeah.
They're at their best, and they've seen that in athletes and different things.
What's the fastest way?
I do that all the
for
time.
to get into a flow
At work.
state?
For that, in my opinion, there are no shortcuts.
Yeah,
What
definitely
it
no
takes is
shortcuts.
A lot of practice,
Mm-hmm.
and it takes is a lot of learning. And then when you're performing,
And being confident in your abilities, and
yeah, but it's executing. I don't think you can get into. I might be wrong, but when I see my kids, I don't think you can get into a flow state just rolling through Instagram.
right.
It's actually delivering a skill you've trained for.
You actually can, but
So you have a craft
you gotta be really advanced.
that you've trained for, and you're performing it at a high level. So you see
Yep.
race car drivers talking
Yep.
about stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it is sort of your craft performed just at the edge of your comfort level.
Yes, sir.
Like video games, if they're too hard, kids will check out. If they're too easy, they'll check out. So something about it tends to be a physical maneuver. I always find that fascinating where you can think, I guess you could think yourself into one of those states, but you see it a lot with people who do a physical task that's challenging, rewarding, something they're engaged in, and at the level of their performance.
Mhm.
I do that all day, every day at work, loading trailers. I've done so good, like, I've trained myself to come in and work and make it look easy, but still be super high level. That's what he's talking about. That's the brain. That's the brain gets into its mind state. This is what metaphysical is. If you can stay at that focused, high alert state, but you're focused and relaxed, this shit better come back. Might not come back, but damn it. But I already told you who he is and all that kind of stuff. So
it's a 2-minute drill at
There we go.
a football game.
Of course, yeah. It's go time, man.
Yeah.
You play football?
No, I love sports though, because I
Yeah.
think there are a lot of parallels.
Yeah, of course. The challenging thing is, I don't have kids, but I don't know if I'd let my kids play football after all the head trauma that I took. I mean, every day we were just taught back in the late 90s to just lead with the head, hit with the head. Now it's illegal. You can't hit the head at all.
Monday Night Football used to open up with the two helmets.
Crashing, yeah.
I remember that.
And the trauma that, I feel like I've had to heal for the last 15, 18 years now. I don't know if it's worth it. I guess if you're not hitting the head anymore, it's different, but there's still going to be clashing.
I got a couple of thoughts about that. I mean, one thing that I didn't like about it was I think they knew this was bad for us, and they kept trying to hide it from us. So
Absolutely.
Hey, just tell us it's bad. Just
tell us.
It's bad. We know boxing's bad.
What
Nobody
you
goes
do
to
with it?
boxing and says, I didn't know.
Stop lying.
You held information that traumatic head injury in football was sort of messing people up.
Yeah.
That's one of my things with it. On the other side is if it's something you love and it's an opportunity for you to advance in your life, who am I to say no? As long as the risks are made aware. Like, hey, if you banged your knee against the wall 30 times a day for 10 years, your knee's gonna be jacked up.
Yeah.
It's no different for your brain. Got it. I still want to play. That's, you know what I mean? It's more about that to me. We all live in different worlds and safety and risk and.
What's
My sons didn't play though. They could have, but they didn't.
They didn't.
Yeah, they played flag and they all played baseball.
Yeah, it's probably safer. So the brain has the ability to heal from trauma then. Physical
Baseball is boring
and
as hell.
emotional trauma. Because I feel like the emotional hidden trauma can be more painful and harder to recover for some, the psychological, emotional trauma, than the physical trauma. You can see it, you can treat the physical trauma in a sense, but depending on
Most
how
baseball
intense
players
it
are
is,
pretty stupid.
but the emotional, psychological, hidden traumas, I feel
I was
like,
playing.
are invisible, and people don't think they need to treat it because they don't see a broken arm and say, I need to go to the doctor because my bone is sticking out, let me put a splint on it and heal it up. We're not trained that way.
There is no easy answer.
Yeah.
But what I will say is that trauma, these are my concepts. I'm not.
Yes.
There's therapeutic trauma, and what I mean by that is resetting a bone after it's broken, the pain of a cancer surgery, but then you know that your cancer's been cut out. Like that, that's good pain.
Right.
And we're just talking about physical trauma.
Yes.
Then there's emotional trauma if people are attacked. That's also intimately connected to emotional trauma, right? So the people who don't have memory after certain injuries or operations, they never have PTSD because they don't remember it. So the emotional context and memories related to trauma, be it emotional, physical, or a combination, requires memory. That's cool, right? I like to think about like just as a concept. I don't have a solution for. Don't do these 3 things, you'll be better. Sort of not my approach, because when people did that with me, I was like, how do you know what I'm going through, man? You look at me, you think everything's good. Are you sure? Are you sure I wasn't attacked last night? Are you sure I didn't find out that my patient didn't do well last night? Are you sure I didn't find out that a loved one was diagnosed with something? Like I just don't want to put people in boxes. In fact, I want people to know that they are new every day. I'm not even the same version of myself I was before the last few years. How can I be understood as a group of people, a man or a surgeon? I just want people to think of each other as individuals and dynamic. That said, I never judge people's trauma to be better or worse. People are looking or stronger or justified. They're looking at, everybody's going to have a traumatic event in their life, whether it's a car crash or hearing. It's unavoidable. It's partly because we put ourselves out there. It's partly because the way we approach the world is to be completely adaptive, right? If we're rigid, then there's less chances for trauma, but that's a life less well lived. So when you put yourself out there, traumatic experiences are unavoidable. Right. That said, okay. So that said, yeah, you get a bruise.
What I hear you say is that if we don't have the memory of the traumatic event, we don't have PTSD. We don't have trauma.
Right.
We don't have a trauma tail.
Right. So that's that's the concept that I want people to walk away and say, memory is important, but memory is the thing that determines whether the event remains traumatic in your
Whether
heart
it's
and mind.
painful still for
Very
you.
good. So let's get into that.
So we just need to heal the memory
Right.
of the trauma.
This is exactly what I'm taking.
You understand it.
Very good. So memories are not files in a cabinet, and
In
actually,
the brain. How is memory categorized?
again, there are some regions that if we remove them, you would lose memory. But memory's not only there; it relies on
It's a team.
pulling from memories of smell to new, like for example, smell is very interesting. It's one of the five senses that we can't tamp down with our thinking. So the perfume or cologne, smell and memory are intimately intertwined.
Wow.
And so you're pulling from all different parts of the brain. Again, memory is a certain electrical flow in the brain.
It's a flow. That's
Um,
crazy. That's
but
good.
it's malleable, it's
Yeah.
moldable.
Yeah.
Just because you have a certain memory today doesn't mean
That explains
that
spirit.
experience, good or bad, will remain good or bad. Our positive vibe right now can be made negative. Our
Yep.
negative vibe right now can be made
Yeah.
positive as we look back at our day today.
Really?
So when you see memory
Yeah.
that way, then you say, okay, wait a second. I was attacked, or I was hurt, or something really traumatized me. And when I think of it, when I smell that smell, when I see that color, I'm traumatized again.
I clench up, I have like stress, a fear, anxiety, yeah.
So the emotional context to a memory is what you can change. You don't want dementia. You don't want to
Yeah.
delete the memory, because that's a different problem.
Yeah. You don't want to block it.
You don't want.
You want to understand.
What you want to do is change the emotional context
Yeah.
attached to that memory.
What happens if you hear this from people a lot who might have been traumatized as kids. Where
We
they
are
kind of
powerful
lost the
beings.
memory, and then they
When it
remember
resurfaces,
they
it's still
resurfaces.
raw.
It's very raw.
Yeah.
But they've stuffed it, they've blocked it, they've numbed it, addicted it, whatever you want to call it.
Driven it to addiction, but
Yeah, exactly. So what happens when?
I don't know. I don't know about the kid stuff as much, because that's a different space, and I don't want to, I want to stay where I feel real comfortable
Sure.
with what I've been reading and learning. So emotional context to memory for adults, in the right setting with the right person, through, they have their techniques, you can actually work through the trauma of the memory and the experience by going to certain therapists who help you get better with that.
To process the memory.
Yeah, just to take the emotional pain,
You are your own therapist.
right, the
Yeah.
emotional
You just gotta
trauma,
believe in yourself.
and dampen that, so you can say, for example, I was.
You can always get over
bring
something.
Examples from my world. Yeah, I mean, when I was diagnosed with cancer, that's a traumatic event. And then you see my patients, you see them over time through different ways. When they say I was diagnosed with cancer and I did this, their face is different describing it later than it was immediately after receiving the diagnosis. So through that's a real life example, right? It doesn't have to be all the stuff, related to violence and all that.
Sure.
So what's
Through that
missing
experience of a cancer diagnosis
from that situation?
how
The
patients
information,
cope
the
with
understanding of information.
immediately, and then you see them months later, years later, because I'd be a mess, right?
This is about a misinformation
I
war.
wouldn't be able to cope, but they surprisingly, not some of them, most of them cope. They get dressed, they come in for their 3-month scans, which to me would be a traumatic experience every time. Is this guy gonna tell me it's back or it's bigger? I mean, think about getting that thing in your mail or
Oh my
email.
gosh.
I gotta go in for this
Scary.
news again,
Yeah.
but somehow they cope, and that's where in Life on a Nice Edge, I learned so much from them, that it's possible to cope with traumatic experiences. I'm not saying you as an individual can, I'm not saying I can, but when you look at a group of cancer patients, and most of them
Wow.
cope, live, move on from very traumatic emotional experiences, as well as physical experience of cancer pain and cancer surgery, right? That's the lesson I want everybody to go through in their mind when they're dealing with their own challenges.
Wow. What's the biggest lessons you learned from the cancer patients you've treated on the way they process and handle their journey from first hearing about they have cancer in the brain or a tumor or something to recovery, what's the biggest lessons you learned there?
It doesn't all end well.
Really?
Some suffer. Many suffer, you know, in their own ways. So it's not this, you know, nobody wishes cancer upon somebody else or on, you know. So it's not like, you know, it's not like this thing, like, it's not an opportunity. And I don't want to ever present it that way. But those that have coped well, they invariably say, I wish I would have lived my life the way I am now after cancer diagnosis.
Oh, man.
Like, I wish I would have lived my life having seen the finish line relatively, because it changes how they live. And they're not sad. As a generalization, like I said, some have suffered, many have suffered, but they wish that they would have made quality of life a priority throughout life, not after the cancer diagnosis. Something about seeing the finish line on the horizon makes people go, no, I don't like that guy. I'm not gonna see him much.
Right.
This is something I enjoy. I want to, you know, they get after it. They get to the business of living in the way they want to deep down inside, but often have been encumbered by the weirdness of interpersonal relationships,
Society
and career, and society.
pressure and everything.
Yeah, all the awkward shit in
How
life.
do you show up in your personal life after seeing all this for the last?
All the programming that we think we have to be.
That's a heavy question. You know, I can't say that I've always dealt well with it. The human stories
comes
are
from
important, but I
somewhere.
was going for perfection of the
Just,
craft.
you were trying to be
Yeah.
a precise surgeon, just
Yeah.
trying to remove it and heal it, fix it.
Yeah. And then
You weren't as connected to the human stories. You were just like,
Yeah.
let me.
I wouldn't say I was disconnected, but
Right.
the from the 5th to the 10th year approximately, when the craft became occupied less of my my mind.
Because it was more automatic. Obviously, everyone's specific, but it's
Right.
more
I
automatic.
was in a rhythm,
Yeah.
and
You changed your thought
I actually
process,
enjoyed the challenge.
and
that's
information
what you
came
want
out.
as a
You
cancer
you
surgeon
you
who's
explored that
trying
way.
to be the best for you and be the best for them at this craft. That's an interesting intersection. They want me to be the best.
Yeah.
They want me to have ambition at being the best surgeon,
Right.
which means tackling the biggest cancer, and the people who chose me to perform their surgery have the fewest complications. Biggest mountain, fewest complications. That's a personal ambition that aligns with what the cancer patients wanted. So that was an interesting thing. You know, it drove me, and at the same time, I could see that since I take care mostly of stage 4 cancer and there's no stage 5,
Really?
that
Stage 5 means what?
there is no stage 5. That means death.
Yeah, death.
Okay.
So stage 4 is, the word terminal is not fair, but stage 4 is the most advanced cancer. So all my patients live a few years, let's just say that. But that means, you know, after a while, you know, I was like, I've cared for like over 1,000 people and they're no longer alive.
Wow.
And it started to mess with my head, man. And
Because stage 4, there's no way to cure it.
stage 4, by definition, other than in blood cancers, is not curable. So the question is, can we get out a few
Extend
years?
life. Yes.
And quality of life during that time.
Oh my
That's what I mean
gosh,
by
man.
that. Yeah, so after a while, I was like, man, I got a drawer full of invitations to funerals.
Oh
and
my
stuff.
gosh.
And I just stood back a little bit and was having some struggles with my own life. And so the answer to your question is, for those who are involved in cancer care, to make yourself vulnerable to actually sort of in piecemeal go on their difficult journey with them. It can be hurtful. It was raw. The last 5 years, though, the last 3 years, I've been able to take that and write about it and see that, like, I have been fortified by letting them teach me, and the privilege of them saying, come along with me in my difficult times. This airplane must crash, and you will ride with us. We choose you to ride with us, but you'll have the parachute at the end. And after a while, I used to tell my kids that, man, I just feel like I'm crashing a lot of planes. And so it went from not noticing it to noticing it and having it mess with me to, wait a second, that might have been the biggest gift of my craft, is to learn from the people in their most difficult times and how they remain optimistic in the
Wow.
face of calamity. So I'm in a different space in my the last couple of years. But that's probably the best question anybody's asked me in the last couple of years. And I
Wow,
appreciate
man.
it.
Of course, man. Wow. So how do you personally manage your mind and your brain health, knowing that? I mean, is there any, I guess, survival rates after a few years of any patient that you work on?
Few, yeah.
So maybe it's